Hello, and welcome to the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast, the podcast redefining women's health one unfiltered conversation at a time. I'm your host, Jacqueline Rose, and every week I'll sit down with leading women's health experts and real women to share their lived experiences, bust health myths, challenge outdated and uninformed narratives, and explore what's really possible for women. We'll talk about periods, fertility, menopause, hormones, aging, and everything in between. This podcast is for every woman who ever felt confused, dismissed, or left out of the conversation about her own health. It is a space to celebrate women, break the silence, and open up conversations between mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Please hit the follow or subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and share this podcast with your daughters, family, and friends. Let's get on with the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast. I am so excited for our guest today. I have known this woman for quite a while. I love her work. We are very connected in the work that we do. And Caroline, we first met because you were a guest on my Menopause Summit a number of years ago. But I love everything that you do. So welcome, Caroline Gaskin, to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I'm so excited about all the things we're going to be talking about. Tell us who you are, what you do, and we'll get straight into our conversation.
Thank you so much. I love that. I love your enthusiasm, and I love the way that you pop up in my space. Like that social media space. It's like, here's a kindred spirit.
Yes, yeah, we definitely are very
Yeah.
connected in so many ways. So I'm so happy
Yeah,
you're
I
here.
love that. So I am a homeopath by training. I trained in homeopathy with someone called Robert Davidson about, well, 25 years ago. I graduated, and I lead with that, but I work a lot with women's health, and I think one of the things that I learned very, very early on, almost in my first months of prescribing, was that people also needed to learn a lot about diet, nutrition, lifestyle, as well as the magic of vibrational medicine. That, we could give the remedy, people would feel great, a part of them, the liver, the kidney would say, hey, this is great, but I'm struggling here.
Yeah.
I need help with detox, or I need help with nutrition. And so I began to build in that diet, nutrition, and lifestyle, and learn about that along the way. And then when it comes to women's health, I've always known that women's health is underfunded, that a trial of drugs is usually done on men, that women aren't the same size as men, they don't metabolize things in the same way. So hang on, do those drugs work the same way for women? um, I've always known that there just aren't enough trials for women's health. So very simple thing. Like I could say to a pregnant woman, it's fine for you to take an antioxidant like CoQ10, but I can't guarantee that it's fine for you to take any other antioxidant on the market because it hasn't been tested. And then we might ask questions. Well, why hasn't it been tested? As a pregnant woman, would you come forward to be part of a trial, even if it is something healthy?
Yeah.
These are things where the system isn't really built for women, and so we're not seeing historically enough information about women's health. And most of us went to the doctor with period pain and were told that it's part of being a woman,
Yeah.
and we went home feeling bereft. And one of the things that I started to do is very early in practice was to create a kind of PDF document. This is great for skincare, for kids with eczema babies. And when I wrote the one for menopause, for periods, for menses, I just recalled this time when we were in a little village. I think it was Banbury. I was 25, 26. My period started, and I went into the local newsagents to get some Tampax or whatever, Lillettes, because that's all we had in those days.
Yes.
And we didn't know that those were bleached. We didn't know, we didn't have Nature Care. We didn't have these brands that we have now that are unbleached. So we're not putting bleached products inside
Yeah.
our bodies anymore, if we know that. But anyway, so I was like, where are these, and the guy had to get a stepladder out and go to the top shelf to get me some Tampax or Lilettes. And they were on the shelf above, the porn magazines. And I was like, how wrong is all of this?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to go and ask a man who was different heritage to me
Yeah.
to get his stepladder out to get me some personal hygiene products. I
Yeah.
mean, amazing the shop was open on a Sunday, really.
Yeah. That's also true. So before we get into the weeds of lots of things we're going to talk about around
Yeah.
women's health and menopause, let's just so that people understand, everyone listening understand,
Mm.
how do you work? What does it mean to be a naturopath? What are you
Mm-hmm.
using? What are you
Yeah.
looking at when a client comes to you? Are you giving is there sort of a standard remedy that you're giving to everyone? Sort of what is actually the practicalities of how you work with your clients?
It's great question. So I like to spend an hour with clients first off. Menopause, I may well do what I call a menopause roadmap and spend an hour and a half where we really look at putting in place a roadmap, because if we haven't done much before we hit menopause, quite a lot's going to be going on. But
Yes.
historically, I would see we're trained in general practice as homeopaths. A couple of things about homeopathy and flower essences that I do work primarily with are what we call energy medicine or vibrational medicine. So they can be used alongside other medicine choices, whether they're natural or mainstream. A lot of people don't know that. But when it comes to herbs, essential oils, these are what we call material medicine. So they have an effect of making something happen or blocking an action in the body. And we might need to check whether there's any contraindication
Mm.
with mainstream medicine or lifestyle or something like that. So when it comes to homeopathy and flower essences, they're what we call energy medicine. They're like informing the body what needs to happen. And it's almost like the body has an aha moment and says, great, thanks, this is how I need to be working from now on.
Yeah.
So that's kind of in a nutshell the difference between homeopathy, herbs of all sorts, Ayurveda, traditional Chinese medicine, etc. So we need to check with those whether they are okay with other forms of medication. That aside, I like to spend an hour wherever a woman's at, even if she is, thinks I wish my daughters knew, even if she's in puberty,
Yeah.
we want to know the story. We want to know her family history. How was it for her mum? How were her early years? How was nutrition in your early years?
Mm.
How is nutrition in your teens?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things that we need to know. Have you been on any long courses of medication that could affect your hormones, for instance? So I like to do what's called a timeline, going right back, and to look at all those things that occur. So if we've got to menopause, say we're perimenopause, we're early 40s, early menopause, then I want to know, has a woman used the birth control pill? What's her diet been like? Because if she's had, for instance, a pesticide rich diet, she's only ever cooked things in the microwave,
Yeah.
it's going to be a little harder to educate around eating more naturally, eating closer to the source of foods. And we've, on that subject, we've got a massive problem in the UK and America. I don't know about the same for you, but I would think it's probably
Yeah.
not far off with what we're calling ultra processed foods,
Food.
especially since the pandemic.
Yeah.
So people were home, they were furloughed here, they started to choose
Yeah.
Deliveroo or Uber over, you know, delivering the healthy fruit and veg and
Yeah.
cooking at home. And I was saying through till I knew that statistic, I was saying through lockdown that I was eating healthier.
Well, I was
I
going
don't
to
know if you're the
say, I would have
same.
thought
Yeah,
that you're home, you've got the time to cook
yeah,
home
yeah,
meal,
yeah,
that home food, the time and everyone as you say, people didn't have the same crazy routines. And so you could look up recipes, you could make home cooked food, you could use raw ingredients. So interesting, you're saying that the statistics don't bear that out.
Absolutely don't. People have started to eat far more ultra processed foods since 2020, and
Interesting.
I guess that is delivery. I guess that's rewarding yourself for having a rubbish time. There could be all sorts of factors in there that we're not really looking at, but it was pretty shocking to read that.
Interesting.
And and so what's the effect of that? The effect of that, it imbalances your blood sugar.
Yeah.
And with imbalanced blood sugar, your body is put into a state of thinking that there is a stressor, that there is some reason you've got raised blood sugar and action needs to be taken,
Yeah.
and the food itself is a stressor for the system.
Yeah.
So all these things.
No, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Let's go back to perimenopause and menopause. And one of the things you've said, and I agree with you 100%, and a lot of what you're saying, I know it comes from the homeopathic sort of a process and framework, but that sort of our assessment where you ask all the questions and you go back definitely is ringing bells of a functional medicine or lifestyle medicine approach where it's not a 7-minute appointment with your doctor. It's that sit down, let's start asking the questions. We're not just treating the symptoms, we're going back to ask the reasons why and how and what. So, as you said, a symptomatic perimenopausal, menopausal woman is coming to you, or maybe even not a symptomatic one, just someone who wants to, feel the best and prepare herself for this stage of life. What are you looking at, and what are you paying attention to, and what are we saying, as you said, like without being rude to any of my audience, if you haven't done anything and now you're coming at the age of 45 or 50 and you want to feel amazing, we've got to sort of take check of, what has been going on beforehand because it doesn't just happen overnight. So let's start talking about sort of this woman's health journey leading up to perimenopause and menopause. And obviously, we've got that whole postmenopause, which we now know can be a good third of a woman's life staying in postmenopause. But let's look at what's gone on beforehand. What are you paying attention to? What questions are you asking? What do we want women to know and be aware of before they even hit perimenopause and menopause? And obviously, when we say perimenopause, we're talking about many, many years.
Yeah.
Women who may not even realize at the age of 43, 44 that they're already in perimenopause. So we're throwing out these terms, but I want women to know, we're talking about a number of years, a stage, a whole sort of journey of experience. But what are you looking at, and what do you want women to be thinking about?
Yeah, great questions. And so the first thing is when did your period start, and how have they been? So for some women, it might be difficult getting going. For some women, they might go straight into a 28-day cycle. So one of the things we're not taught at all at school, or certainly not over here, is what should a healthy cycle look like? A healthy cycle should be 28 days.
Yeah.
It should be there should be a bleed, which I believe is 3 to 4 days. I mean, I don't believe we're meant to bleed for a week, because if we were out in the wilds, we would be a bit incapacitated during that time. So yeah, it's a quiet time. For most of us, we may not be able to take a quiet time around our bleed, but then ideally a 3 to 4 day healthy bleed that starts and stops. And then around day 9 to 14, we've got signs that we are becoming fertile, and we need to know if a woman, and really in your early 40s, if you've never had that cycle, here's an opportunity to work towards getting that cycle.
Yeah.
If you've always had that cycle and it's subtly beginning to change, that's what I'm listening for. And I will say, for some women, it is sudden, and usually that comes after a shock or a trauma.
Yeah.
So some big event can pitch a woman straight into menopause, and it doesn't happen in that many clients, but I certainly have clients who were like, one day they were menstruating, every month, and the next day they weren't because of some major event. So shock, trauma may be what we're prescribing for in that instance. And it may be that the periods come back, or it may be that we're working with postmenopause now and we need to work with it rapidly because symptoms have come on suddenly. And the other instance actually where that happens, which I should mention, is things like surgery. If a woman's had a surgical menopause or a chemical menopause, we're going to need to work fast to comfortably go into that post-menopause time.
Transition.
So listening out for subtle changes over time. And one of the things that I remember about my periods at one point is I really wanted to eat chocolate before the period. I could go to Tesco's and buy this chocolate mousse, and I would only ever want it like 3 days before my bleed. I now know, which I never knew then, that chocolate is really rich in magnesium and iron and polyphenols. And all right, it probably wasn't the best from Tesco's, but my body wanted that. And my body was telling me that I needed to increase my magnesium. So if only I'd known that, I wouldn't have got to, even though I'm a health practitioner, we weren't taught. It's another thing to know is your health practitioner would not have been taught about menopause as a standalone subject. Neither has your doctor, your GP, or your MD has not been
And
taught
even
that.
worse, they are not taught really about the different ways that periods can show up. They have not been taught, when I've spoken about this a lot on the podcast, about PCOS, polycystic ovaries, about endometriosis, about conditions like PMDD. And I never know what PMDD, the exact stands for, but it's
I'm going to
basically
look it
those,
up. I guess,
for those listening, it's extreme and very emotional PMS. And even just a regular PMS experience, intense cramping, intense cravings, very, very heavy bleeds at the beginning of your cycle. All these things are considered abnormal or extreme, or, just go away and take some Nurofen, or any other, painkiller, or that Nurofen with a pink package because it's designed especially for women and girls during their, PMS early period cycle. But the whole women's health conversation, typically and traditionally, we both will admit that things are changing, and we're going to talk about what those changes are looking like. But typically and traditionally, and especially a doctor who was trained 20 years ago or 15 years ago, they were not, there was nothing. I mean, my audience and anyone listening needs to know doctors were not trained in the nuances of women's health. And I don't think people really understand that.
No, not at all. So as a homeopath, we're listening to, which is, I'm not sure if a functional medicine doctor listens in the same way. A naturopath is somewhere between the two. And some naturopaths are also trained in homeopathy and herbs. But we're listening for things like, what is the length of your bleed? So I said, when an ideal bleed, but for many women, they would say, do you know what? I really bleed for, say, 8 to 9 days. And my bleed stops and starts. And I'm like, oh, okay. So it's characterized by that. And then we might ask about the nature of the bleed. Is it bright blood? Is it brown? Is it clotted? We want to know all these things as homeopaths, because that will guide us to one of the many thousands of remedies that we use. And there would be hundreds of remedies around female hormonal cycle irregularities, but there are some key ones, some lead ones. So I'm going to just illustrate with 3 of those. So for instance, if the bleed stops and starts, I'm like, oh, okay, how are you before your period? And I'm listening out for a remedy called pulsatilla, which is, it has the characteristic emotionally of being irresolute, can't make their mind up. They're also tearful, and they're better for talking about it. So if I start to get those modalities with this irresolute bleed, it stops, it starts, it doesn't quite get going, then I'm like, oh, this is a pulsatilla type of picture that we're building here. And I would be asking some other questions. It might be that there's a very clotted bleed, and then I'm making a distinction between a couple of other lead remedies called sepia and lachesis, who actually pulsatilla can have a clotted bleed as well. But lachesis feels so much worse before the period, in a way of the lachesis patient becomes quite vitriolic. They're quite mean. They might even notice that in themselves. And you would notice that in talking to them. Lachesis patients talk a lot and they talk at you. Pulsatilla does also talk, but she is more anecdotal, kind of witters on a bit about things. And you're like, yep, yeah, I've got the point now. It's a different kind of conversation. Both of them converse, whereas the sepia patient feels more, she can feel angry, she can look a bit narky as well before her period, but she is generally wants to be alone. She doesn't generally want to chat about it to her friends. She's more irritable with herself, irritable with other people, and just wants to get out for a run or do a movement class, and then she'll feel so much better. So we start to talk as homeopaths in what we call modalities. What makes you feel better? You know, the sepia patient would be perhaps contrasted with another remedy in that they can get backache before their period.
Yeah.
So before the bleed comes, it's all in the back. They just want that warmth on their back. Yeah. And you know, feeling crampy, and they want to move their lower body, and then they'll feel so much better. Both lachesis and sepia feel so much better when the period started, but they have a different characteristic about their bleeds. So we're listening to these details about how it is for a woman. And one of the things that always makes me laugh about sepia is I used to teach the doulas and midwives about using remedies during childbirth. And they'd all say, when I talked about the sepia one, and they're like, yeah, feel irritable with their partners and irritable with their kids and just want to be on their own, they'd all be like, I think I need some of that.
Caroline, the way you're speaking and the way you're describing these different characteristics of a bleed and how then it relates to the different energy and the different treatment and the different modalities, could you ever imagine your doctor asking you, so how do you experience your bleed of a period?
Yeah.
Is it clotted? Does it come and go? Is it a nice red flow? Like, no doctor is ever asking those questions. I don't even know a doctor would know what to do with the answer if they did ask the question. But it makes so much sense because the menstrual cycle, the bleed, the way a woman feels over the 28 days, which I think is just a random number that was once used. And I, you know, women's cycles can be 32 days or 34 days and also be, you know, very standard and very normal, but we'll use that 28 number. But these questions of how are you experiencing this very biologically natural, physiologically feminine experience goes to the heart of who you are, what you are, how you experience life as a woman. And it's never, ever talked about in, you know, a conventional, regular medical space between you and your practitioner.
Absolutely. So, you know, even things like with the sepia that I talked about, that is our most progesterone deficient remedy when we look at the big remedies, the remedies we use often. And so that is characterized by the womb being heavy, you know, so this might be the woman who has breakthrough bleeds during a pregnancy because the womb has a laxity about it. Sepia looks after the muscles of the womb, the flow in the lower body, you know, and obviously the womb is in the lower part of the abdomen. So, you know, it's a fascinating journey. Sepia is one of the remedies that's most likely to feel nausea of pregnancy because the womb's action is normally downwards, you know, throughout the cycle. It's preparing to either hold baby or, oh no, we're not pregnant. We're gonna slough off that endometrium and have a period. And so the womb's action is generally downwards. Even birthing the baby is downwards. But in pregnancy, the womb's action needs to draw up, hold the baby, the action of holding the baby. You know, sepia as a person can be irritated by having to hold the baby. You know, she's like, oh, I'm not the autonomous woman I used to be. You know, it's difficult for me to hold the baby. I mean, how amazing to understand that about things like postnatal depression, for
Yeah,
instance,
yeah,
and I know I've talked a little bit about pregnancy, but what happens at menopause when I'm working with a woman and we've done 2 or 3 appointments, invariably we will go back to what happened when she was in utero. How was it for your mum? We talk
wow,
about that timeline because we need to do some healing
yeah,
around our own mother's experience
yeah,
that she was having while we were in her
yeah,
womb. And we often need to let go of some apron strings there,
yeah.
and that's really personal, really subtle. Mum might not be around anymore, she might be around. That may be where the healing needs to be,
Yeah.
and that's
I
amazing
had
to me.
one of the women I interviewed for the podcast is a woman called Sandra Wint, who
Mm-hmm.
talks about this concept of, we all know the concept of mothering, but she talks about the concept of daughtering. What is it
Yeah,
like
love
to
it.
be the daughter of your mother?
Mm,
And I won't say trauma, but the experiences that your mother had, and that you then sort of that infiltrates down to you
yeah,
through your daughtering experience. And that's similar to what
absolutely.
you're saying.
Absolutely. And then, there's just amazing things that happen at menopause, which never get talked about. So there's this big drive, as we know, to HRT, to medicalize the
Yeah,
menopause experience. But if we understood, as studies are beginning to show us,
yeah,
that the right brain actually increases, that we become wiser, we become more intuitive, that actually if we spend some time every week doing something where we freeform and create, what does forgetting a name, remembering a name matter?
yeah,
It's like, wow, this whole other part of me is growing.
yeah.
How important,
Okay, and we're going to go and
it's an
jump on the
anchoring in,
HRT
isn't it?
menopause conversation. But before we do that, I just want to clarify, because everything that you're saying, from what you're saying, I'm getting, and I just want to clarify with you, that every single woman, therefore, who you work with, is getting her own personalized
Yeah,
menu of, homeopathic treatment. From what you're saying, there is no, standard protocol. It's everyone is, unless there are sort of some basic things, but it
yeah.
sounds like everyone has their own journey, their own health history, their own story, their own history, and therefore even if there are sort of broad strokes commonalities, and maybe there are some basic things that every woman needs to be taking, really this is a very personalized approach.
It is, but I think one of the reasons I started to work and kind of lead with menopause is because when I went through menopause myself, I realized that there are commonalities that we all
Yes.
need to listen into because of how we live now. And
Okay.
and how we live now is exposure to all sorts of things that we are dealing with all day, every day. And most people are magnesium deficient. If you don't have enough magnesium, you're going to get cramps. That could be in the leg, that could be the womb. You're going to feel those muscle aches and pains. So we get, this is another thing that we're looking at generally, is the different demographics. So women in the UK tend to have menopause at 51. It's a little later in the Latin American countries. It's actually much earlier in the Eastern Mediterranean countries,
Yeah.
or Turkey, rural Turkey. It was much earlier. That was a study in, I think it was 2006. 2005 or 6 study in Bangkok showed that it was aches and pains. That's generally not what I see here, although it
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah.
But so we have these kind of demographics, but most women need magnesium. Only recently have I started, in the last 2 years, have I started to say, get out every morning and experience some daylight, even if you live in the northern hemisphere and it doesn't look very bright. That light outside is so much brighter than the light indoors, and you will therefore start to set in place your melatonin to fall asleep comfortably at the end of the day, for instance. Yesterday I had a fantastic day with a friend of mine who's like a meditation teacher, and a circle of people met that we've often met over the years, and it was a beautiful day. But I went out at lunchtime and bought a coffee. So I had a coffee a bit late in the day. I paid for that. I didn't, I woke at like 10 to 2 or something, and just thought, oh, damn, but I reached for my homeopathic sleep remedies and went back to sleep. But, so there are solutions for these things, but we have to learn some stuff in that menopause roadmap, and it's like, have your coffee before 12, only have one a day. Otherwise, this is going to happen. Get out to enjoy that light. These are things that are free, but everybody needs to know. Magnesium's low cost. Everybody needs to know. Essential fatty acids. Women need more fats. We're so used to denying ourselves and saying, in order to achieve that goal, I've got to restrict. Actually, at menopause, we need to add stuff in.
Okay, so let's go into that menopause space. Talk to me a little bit about hormones, hormone dysregulation, the triggers for hormonal dysregulation, and sort of a lot of the language that we use around menopause is of hormonal deficiency, which is like the word I hate the most. And then we'll sort of move on to the HRT element. But talk to me first about like what is actually going on with our hormones from your perspective, and sort of why and how, and sort of what's going on with that piece of the story.
So many of us, when we look at things that you've talked about, like PCOS, endometriosis, PMDD, all irregularities of the hormonal cycle in our world are to do with some kind of estrogen excess. And we get estrogen excess through all sorts of places. So it can come through pesticides, it can come through heating our food in plastic, in a microwave, releasing phthalates into the food, which distort our hormonal picture. And it's all there. It's all there in the chemicals. It's all there if we choose to look at what's happened since the 1970s, when we introduced, chemicals, food colorings, etc., etc. And then there's environmental stuff like waveform radiation, the Wi-Fi, which is amazing. But what can we do to mitigate some of the fallout of that? So there's a bigger picture of the things that affect our hormones throughout our lives. And we've been coping with that in some way, maybe dealing with symptoms, maybe ignoring them, maybe not experiencing too bad a symptom. And then what happens in early perimenopause is that we have estrogen surges, which can create a lot of anxiety for us. Definitely experienced a lot of those myself. And I believe that they are exacerbated by, and then our natural estrogen dropping off. We regulate. We need these hormones beyond. Another thing, we need these hormones beyond menopause. So menopause, when we've had 12 months of not having periods, we need some testosterone, we need some progesterone, we need some estrogen, we need DHEA. We just don't need as much because we're not making baby, but we still need those things.
I think that's a really important point, because I think the perception is that our hormones are going to be zero when we're in postmenopause, and that's definitely not the case. They just don't need to be at the same levels that they used to be, and the gap in between sort of the zero and what you need is sort of the area that we're playing with here. And I think that's why that word hormonal deficiency has become quite popular, because your hormone levels are lower than they were during our reproductive years in postmenopause. But the deficiency makes it sound like it's a medical problem. And it starts using this medicalization, which I know a lot of people don't like that term, medicalization of menopause. But the minute you start using certain terminology, it does imply that there is a problem, or that your body isn't doing what it should be doing. But in the same breath, they're saying, but menopause is a normal, natural, biological stage of a woman's life. So it can't be that our hormones are deficient if this is a normal, natural, biological stage of a woman's life cycle.
So we're trying to get to a new place where we just don't need as much of all the hormones as we used to, because we are trying always to make baby. Whatever our fertile journey has been or is, we are trying to make baby. And there are many reasons why that is much more difficult for us these days. One of the biggest reasons is because we live in such a high stress space. And if we are always in the cortisol space, then we are going to eventually get worn out faster. And we're going to start to talk, other organs are going to start to talk, usually the thyroid. And so if we've been in a high stress place, and as I talked about, that stress can be environmental stresses, it can be things at work, it can be relationship, all sorts of things create a high stress space for us, which we never used to have, and obviously we're entering into a time here in the UK when, money is going to be a really big stressor for people. We just come through 5 years of stress. We've just also come through a disease where I simply saw women, COVID to long COVID, having worse periods. That's why I talked about the remedy lacosis, actually, because it's one of the good remedies for those kind of heavy periods that women suddenly had. Kind of pitching them into menopause. But that, so there's these things which have a factor on our stress levels. And one of the biggest things at menopause is really carving out time for us, maybe to do those things that enhance the right brain, expanding and growing into intuition, creative process, whatever it is, something that you do for you every week that makes you feel good in that field, rather than triggering the beta brainwaves, which, is our social media and our kind of our work, if you like, is mainly that kind of triggering the wake up brainwaves, if you like. We need to kind of access others as we to navigate menopause. So part of it is learning to create boundaries, so this estrogen dominance that we're in, we see in things like breast problems, headaches. There are certain symptoms or the not very good a metabolic process around estrogen as well, because once that has done its job, we need to break it down.
We need to get it out of our bodies.
We need to get it out of our body. So, whether you're on HRT or whether you're in menopause or post-menopause or a young woman, eat broccoli 3 times a week to help your body metabolize estrogen more efficiently. So like I said, it's kind of adding things in. And this journey, this learning is all new because there is a lot more happening around us. We do have a lot more menopausal symptoms. I've also seen articles saying it's a natural process, but it isn't natural to experience most of what women experience. We need to drop
But the symptoms are a sign that there is imbalance. The symptoms are not a prerequisite for menopause. The symptoms are a sign there's something going on. So that sort of leads us into this whole HRT conversation, which I don't want to spend too much time on, but I do think it's an important topic to hear your thoughts on as a homeopath, as someone who really sees women's health from a slightly different perspective. And understanding that our hormones are changing and that this is part of our natural female life cycle progression. And the fact that you've said that so many of women's health, reproductive related issues are, and this imbalance in our hormones and often imbalance in estrogen levels. We are not saying you should not take HRT. We just want to educate women to understand what is actually going on with HRT. And because HRT has hormone replacement therapy, it's sometimes called menopausal hormonal treatment. It's sort of been rebranded a little bit. Because it has become so popular and because correctly and rightly so, the HRT cancer associations have been debunked, and they're, for a normal, regular woman with no high risk factors and with no, family history, there is no increased cancer risk. I think it's just important to say, there may be other reasons why, other high risk factors, but just for an HRT concept, because it has become so popular and so accessible in so many places. how do you engage with this topic? What are you hearing from colleagues and, clients? Are more or less women coming to you because they're like, well, now I can go to HRT and it's safe and it's accessible. So I don't need, a naturopathic approach. I don't need a holistic approach because HRT is readily available for me. What are you hearing and seeing, and how are you engaging and embracing this sort of change in the menopause
Yeah,
conversation?
great questions. I think I still approach it from, you might not want to take medication.
Yeah,
Not everybody in the world wants to take medication. And that can be quite a surprise for some people. Like it is a surprise when somebody pitches up and they're 70 or 80 and they're not on medication. Like most medics are like, what? You're not on any medication.
yeah,
But it is perfectly okay to go through life
yeah.
without medication as long as you feel okay. And as long as you're finding solution for the things that do trouble you. So personally, I like to go natural. And during my journey, what happened at 46 was my thyroid crashed, and it was like, you need to be medicated. And I was like, I don't want to take thyroxine either,
Yeah.
because the side effects of that are blah blah and blah, and I'd rather avoid them. Thank you very much. So there's that might be where you come from, and that's fine. There is so much that you can do to do menopause naturally. We just need to know how. And then you might be listening, you're like, well, I'm on HRT and I'm okay, which is fine. Um, just listen out for the things that can occur. Every medication will create deficiency at some level. So if you're on HRT and you're okay, just bear in mind that it will ultimately deplete you in B vitamins, vitamin C, zinc, magnesium, and iodine. So
And I
you might
don't
want
think
to add
women
those back in.
realize,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
women would think,
yeah,
I don't even think they realize that HRT is a pharmaceutical. I don't even
yeah,
know that they're connecting the dots between HRT and that it is actually a medication, a drug, something you want, even if you're taking
yeah,
bioidenticals. Even
absolutely.
bioidenticals, which is definitely much better than anything synthetic. But
Yeah,
even bioidenticals, it's still something external. I don't know.
yeah.
I
Yeah, I mean, I'm like one of the other things that I didn't talk about was I love superfoods. So I'm not a herbalist, so I don't really prescribe herbs. I might talk and say, look, these are great, and send someone off to a medical herbalist to look at that aspect if I feel they need that alongside whatever it is that we're doing. So I come from more naturopathic and the homeopathic background. But with superfoods, it would be really easy to take a superfood alongside your HRT so that you are better supported and you don't become deficient in that. The other thing I wanted to talk about there is supplements and medication are full of fillers, binders, other incipients that I don't necessarily want to take. So that's another reason for not taking mainstream medication is it's that pill has got all sorts of other things in. Sometimes when I see women on HRT and thyroxine, actually, either or sometimes both, they have a sudden change in their symptoms. And I'm like, why aren't our remedies working the
yeah,
way we got you into a place of balance here? And then I ask the question, have you started on a new version of one of the medications?
yeah,
And so that for some reason they've been given a different brand, different fillers and binders, and suddenly we've got all the symptoms of hypothyroidism, or suddenly they've got hot flushes in the middle of their once balanced HRT. So that can happen. So I'm not a fan of that either. But also, yeah, just if you're on HRT and you're going along okay, just bear in mind that there are things that you'll become deficient in that you might want to top up, and that's easy to do. Or it might be that you're on HRT and it's not sorted everything. For
yes,
years I would see. So I worked at a pharmacy called Ainsworth's, which is right in the middle of the Harley Street, that part of London where people are coming in. When I'm talking 15 years ago, women coming in from Harley Street, going to particular bioidentical, body identical clinics, getting compounded HRT.
Yeah.
And one of the problems was at that point in time, they weren't getting the recipe right. So most women were able to maintain their weight, which they were happy with. They hadn't gone into full menopause, but their levels of anxiety and their sleep problems were off the scale. Wow. So I was working with the HRT, but those symptoms, anxiety and sleep. What I'm seeing now, which is different, is those I do see that sometimes, and I do have women who are still coming for those symptoms, but women on HRT now, I'm more likely to see that there is not enough progesterone in the mix. And it's really, really, like, I cannot stress how important it is. If you're taking HRT, you must be taking a combination of estrogen and progesterone. And those original trials were all about estrogen. They were inappropriate age of women that they were being done on, etc. You can go and read that. But what you have to realize as well is when we are putting in too much estrogen, it gives rise to things like breast problems. It gives rise potentially to headaches, to liver congestion, potentially something like bloating and constipation, cysts. Exactly. So we need to get, and certainly if you were on HRT and you've got breast problems, you've got ovarian cysts, polyps, fibroids, those kind of things occurring, there's too much estrogen in the equation, and we need to increase the progesterone somehow. You could do that naturally. You could do that with, obviously, say first go and see your doctor. You need to get that estrogen down. And that was a major criticism of some of the leading clinics in the UK, that there was too much estrogen being given to women, and then we get the cancers. So we have had women recently with too much estrogen from their HRT who have developed irregularities. And I can't stress that.
And that's because of the ratio. We're not talking saying that estrogen itself is cancer inducing. We're saying that you've got to, this is one of the things that I find really
too much estrogen though is like, that's my point.
Yes.
Too much
and the ratio between estrogen and progesterone. The ratio between, and this is I think one of the things that is really missed in the whole menopause conversation. We talk about these very important hormones: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, maybe FSH, maybe DHEA, these very important and reproductive hormones, and the way that they are fluctuating and changing and, coming down to new lower levels during menopause and into postmenopause. And we talk about them as if they're hormones in a vacuum. Without
Absolutely.
Talking about the fact that estrogen, as we always say, there are estrogen receptors in every single cell of the body. It is not only a reproductive hormone. It does 101 different functions around the body. The same with progesterone, the same with testosterone. We think of these hormones and they are presented to us in the menopause conversation as reproductive menopause impacting hormones. But actually, they do a huge amount in our bodies. And so when they change, and then when they are boosted through HRT, there are going to be lots of other things that happen in the body as a result of that. And the balance and the levels and the relationships and the ratios between estrogen and other things going on in the body, estrogen and progesterone, estrogen and thyroid function. All of these things are going to have knock-on effects. So it's not just about, in my mind, taking HRT to relieve your menopausal symptoms. We've got to talk a big about what else is going on as we are replenishing or, having extra, the replacement of these hormones as, to support you. What else is it doing to the natural processes of the body that are expecting these hormone levels to decline to new lower levels in postmenopause? And I think that is not talked about at all when a woman decides to take HRT.
No, absolutely. And I think also I was reminded there of the earlier conversation about cortisol, if we're in that stress state, then cortisol becomes the dominant hormone, and we don't make testosterone and progesterone as well. So we get this kind of horrible conversation of too much estrogen and too much cortisol. And so it may be that the antidote, to some of these, apart from making changes to how we live our lives, and our diet and our nutrition, to generate more DHEA, which sits behind the other hormones. It's one of the hormones which is about making other hormones. Yeah. DHEA is about having a nice time with your friends, about exercise, about be nurtured by getting out and moving and being with people. And so, it might be, we're talking in December, just with the come up to a really busy time of year socially, that the last thing you feel like is socializing and getting a hot flush, that you think about your parties, and you're socializing and say, well, I'm going to take a kind of bit of a less active role this year, because I need to look after myself, but I still want to have that lovely hanging out with people that matter, so sometimes it's a question of how we live our lives and adjusting to a new me that feels comfortable, that's okay. Some of these things that we're driven to do are about our society, and we need to step back. One of the things I always say about estrogen is it makes us a yes woman, because if we were a no woman, that fertility stuff's not going to happen.
Not happening. No.
So we've been very driven by estrogen for a very long time, and we live in an estrogen dominant culture. And now it's time to nurture the progesterone, the clear thinking, the holding, the hormone that has the capacity to look after the community. It's less self-centered than estrogen. And I think that's a really beautiful place to move into, but we need to understand that balance, and as I've said, stress disorders the blood sugar. We can't, progesterone is made when we feel more stable. So a lot of the goal is, how do I balance my blood sugar? I could do that for diet. I could do that by increasing magnesium. I could do that by body brushing in the morning, by yoga nidra, by changing my yoga instead of doing vinyasa, which charged me up too much. I went into restorative. I mean, there's so many ways in which we can enhance the production of progesterone and feel better.
Yeah. I think this is really powerful because it's not that it's, anti-HRT and, we're sort of like going on the bandwagon of you don't touch it and don't go there and it's bad for you. That's not what we're saying here. It's about an approach to women's health. It's about understanding what is going on in your body, listening and knowing, I think, that there is another way. It's not HRT or nothing. It's HRT is one option, and you are presenting another option that makes so much more sense, and to be honest, I think probably sets you up for a much more successful post-menopause
absolutely
experience.
And I think also it's important to, in the HRT conversation, when a woman can't take HRT or has tried it and it hasn't worked, it's really, don't suffer, like find a solution, seek solution. Coming off HRT, do it gently. I had so many women in my Facebook group who just stopped, and I was like, ooh, ouch. Even after a week or 2 weeks, recently a woman stopped, and I was like, you need to put back. It's immediately stripped you of, maybe there was not very good baseline of B vitamins and magnesium. I mean, none of that is assessed by the person prescribing the HRT. What is this woman's stress levels like? What has she got adequate nutrition for me to add in a drug, a medication? And what will happen as well, so we're in this HRT space, ultimately the ovaries stop doing their work and the adrenal glands take over. Now their job is to also release other steroid hormones the cortisol. So under stress, it becomes a struggle to also produce this estrogen to take on a new job, basically. Yeah. So we need to, whatever our choice, if we're going to come off HRT at some point, which we can't be on it forever. And one of the worst things, and I really feel for women who are in their 80s, who suddenly have to come off it for some reason, because the body is not as strong as it was in your 50s. Yeah. And so you're going to need a lot of support.
Yeah, you haven't got that resilience. Your body hasn't had to work for itself, and it doesn't have the resilience to know how to manage.
Or the building materials, the actual resources. So it's resources, it's resilience, it's like, but what if every woman who is on HRT also understood the deficiencies that do occur, and was doing that and withdrew gently, would have a much, but there just is not that conversation in mainstream medicine. It's just not available.
Yeah. I want to ask you about one more thing before we finish. I know we've been talking so long and about so many different topics, and it's so fascinating. One thing is about ashwagandha, because ashwagandha, I know, is sort of thrown out there as, yes, you can buy it on any of the online pharmacies, and ashwagandha are going to help you balance, and it's, all these wonderful things about ashwagandha, which I think is correct. But ashwagandha at the end of the day is still a very potent remedy. And I just think that women are sort of saying, oh, yes, I'll just take my ashwagandha and I'll feel fine. Maybe just talk to me. I'm only bringing up this particular one because it really is thrown out there as like, the balancer, the naturopathic, homeopathic, herbalistic thing that everyone is taking. But I just think we do need to realize that in its most ultimate form, it is a potent homeopathic remedy. I don't know the exact definition, if it's a Chinese medicine remedy or a homeopathic remedy, but I don't believe that women should be buying it off the shelves in capsules. Tell me what you think about it.
So it's usually, it traditionally comes from the Ayurvedic herbal medicine chest. And there are many others, and you might have heard of something like Shatavari or Rhodiola. There are others in that medicine chest. We've also got a medicine chest, a herbal medicine chest of traditional English or traditional herbal medicine that kind of comes from, things like sage and red clover and things which are more available here in the UK. And then you've got the Chinese medicine system, where there is some crossover with the ashwagandha and with the traditional herbal medicine, and actually just got different names. But there's also a whole load of others in the traditional Chinese medicine chest. First of all, when buying herbs, try to go organic. Try to go to a reputable supplier. So what we see when something floods the market is obviously the absolute opposite of that. So, make sure you're getting a good quality product. And I prefer to avoid the capsules, which are made out of vegetable cellulose. And I do take some stuff with capsules myself, but I try to, sometimes I break them open into, a shake or smoothie or something like that. So I prefer with ashwagandha to go for a powder. So what it is what we call an adaptogen. So it's a herb which doesn't just make something happen or block an action. It helps regulate. So the herbs which are called adaptogens are actually amongst the easiest to just reach for, because whatever the situation, they will regulate. So there's another herb called maca, which is wonderful for fertility cases and some female hormonal issues and some male hormonal issues, usually around fertility. But what I find at menopause is that it's a very boosting herb. So you're more likely to get hot flushes, for instance. It is nutritive. It's got all these fabulous elements.
Every midlife woman is being told to go maca.
Yeah, exactly. So maca is great if you are deficient in certain nutrients, but take it at menopause, especially in late peri, you're probably going to get hot flushes from it. So we need to listen to, is this herb that I'm taking helpful? Yeah. What I usually recommend ashwagandha for is anxiety and or not being able to sleep. So a teaspoon of that to get a powder form, get a good quality brand, teaspoon of that in a plant milk with a little honey, gorgeous, relaxing drink at the end of the day. So it is one of the easy to get, more useful herbs that is adaptogenic. There are others, I quite often get women coming in and they'll be taking rhodiola, and I'll be like, why are you taking that? Because it's not really appropriate for you.
Yeah.
Is it doing any good? So when you're starting something new, even magnesium, if you wanted to add that in, is think about where you are now. Add that in and assess after a week. Assess with most supplements, we say, so lesser quality supplements, we say 3 months. A really good quality supplement or superfood, I would want to see an improvement within 2 to 4 weeks. We're like, do you know, I should be on that. That's great. So I prefer to take something like blue-green algae, which is full of B vitamins and vitamin C and iron. It's plant source protein. And I hadn't taken that for years. I did take it for years and years and years. We don't need to go into why. It's very good if you've got heavy metals in the system. So I was actually taking it for that reason, because I had mercury amalgam fillings. Right. So I hadn't taken it for a while, and I thought, I quite fancy getting back on that. And so I started to take it again, and I was like, wow, I could feel the energy in my body. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't realize maybe I was a bit deficient in energy. But anyway, I could feel it in my body. Great, I'm going to stay on that. And that's the feeling that you want. If you take an essential fatty acid and your nails are stronger, it's the right essential fatty acid for you. Yeah. Just on the magnesium, I went to see my homeopath. I'm used to getting a homeopathic remedy from my homeopath, and this was quite a few years ago. So it was in perimenopause, and he sent me off to go and get some magnesium. And I was like, oh, what new remedies, And within 5 days of using a magnesium spray oil on my lower legs, so not even taking it, my irritability and my nausea went. So I was suffering from nausea and I was really irritable. And I can't do menopause if it feels like pregnancy. Nausea was basically what I was feeling. So so he sent me off to do that, and 5 days in, those symptoms went. That was working for me. So listen to your body, which brings us to what I wish I'd known when I was younger.
So I was just about to ask you what this podcast is called, the things I want my daughters to know. But what do you want your daughters, goddaughters, nieces, that next generation of women? Because there is so much now, and we haven't even touched upon the whole research and what's going on in women's health research and the developments and the movements and the changes for good, and sometimes a little bit not so great. But the field is changing, that we can both agree. So absolutely. With all the changes, with all the information that is now out there, with all the knowledge that is out there, what does the next generation of women really need to know?
So such a great question. And we talked about this a little bit earlier at some point. I would love it if more women came in pre-menopause and said, what do I need to do? So there's that. And then really when it comes to daughters, goddaughters, nieces, it's like, listen to your body. And not listen to your body, but learn to listen to your body and do something about what it's telling you. That's it in a nutshell, because I had no idea that the chocolate cravings meant that I needed magnesium. I had no idea that feeling chilly, feeling low mood-wise, feeling tired before my periods already was showing me that my thyroid was talking to me. I ignored all those symptoms until...
And you know what? And even had you gone to a doctor,
later.
Even had you done the right thing and gone to a doctor, you still probably wouldn't have got any really good answers or guidance.
No. So when I first went to see a homeopath, we looked at regulating my cycle, and my periods were lighter and much more comfortable. I didn't have cramps. I'd always had a very regular cycle, but my homeopathy really helped my periods. And yet I still had these subtle signs that something was wrong. Years and years and years ago, even before that kind of like feeling chilly and, down, and oh yeah, I'd get constipated as well. Classic signs. Now
Yeah.
I know, little information.
Yeah.
Thyroid not as vibrant and functional as you think, and so years and years and years ago, when I was in my early 20s, I always noticed that if I drank before my periods, drank alcohol
Yeah.
before my periods, I would never get drunk. So I noticed that. What
Wow.
what was that telling me? It was telling me that I even then had adrenal override, that I could override the alcohol in that time before my period. Guess what you do at menopause? You start to do the adrenals. It's all there. That's why we take the timeline and we look, if a woman comes in and I say, how was the birth? Did you take the birth control pill? Like I said, I asked that timeline thing. And then I ask how it was on the pill. They'll say, oh, I didn't really get on with it. I didn't take it for that long.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to know how. Because if you gained weight, guess what you're going to do at menopause? If you felt out of sorts, guess what you're going to do at menopause? If you were achy or, angry, guess what you're going to do? These are times of hormonal change.
Yeah.
And, so listen in to your symptoms and learn to ask questions of the right people, I guess we're saying, about those symptoms and say, I just feel tired and exhausted before my periods. Is there something I should be doing? Because that will be it's like savings, isn't it? It's like having a savings account.
Yeah.
That will be your savings account for menopause.
Yeah. Caroline, I know we could carry on talking for hours and hours. You're such a wealth of information. You have such an amazing perspective.
Thank you.
Tell everyone where they can find you. I know you have a very successful Facebook group. Let people know because I know they're going to want to check in and learn more from you. So, where can people find you online?
Thank you. So probably the most useful place is my YouTube channel because things always stay up there. So it's Caroline Gaskin Wellbeing, and there's loads of free stuff you can listen to, tons. Instagram, as we know, is a constant feed. So I'm on there as the menopause homeopath and kind of working with that because AI has put a new framework in behind the whole of social media. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is where you and I do a lot of chat. And I think that there is a lot more conversation, serious conversation going on there. So kind of at the education level, I think that's great. And then I do have a Facebook group called Managing Menopause Naturally without HRT. I will say of that, though, that Facebook algorithms and whatever aren't great at the moment. And because it's got 5,000 people in it, it's a bit diffuse, and so I think that really what needs to come through is me and Fiona that I run the natural menopause course with. That's a really great space. If you want to do menopause naturally, come and do the course. It's 6 weeks. The next one's in April 2026. We do that twice a year, but we are also setting up a membership space where we can answer questions more directly and meet the needs of women who genuinely want to listen. Because Facebook can be a bit general, can't it? That's what I find. It's okay. But I think often women go to Facebook when they're at their peak pain point saying, help me, can I take this supplement? And that's like, as you can hear, it's about so much more than a supplement. And that supplement may not be what you need. It might be some magnesium, time on your own, doing that creative project you've thought about for years. So
amazing. Well, thank you. As hopefully everyone listening can hear, our bodies are way more complicated than I think we realize, and definitely than we were ever given the impression about. And it's not just about going to the doctor and getting the medication to treat the symptom. The listening, the learning, the understanding, and then going to someone who is asking the right questions, who can really guide you. I think that is what you're all about, and that's what you've really shared with us today. So thank you so much, Caroline. I always love speaking with you and connecting with you. I follow you and really live rent free in your brain because you have so much to share. So thank you, and thank you everyone for listening. Please reach out, follow Caroline, listen to her content, watch her YouTube channel. She, as you can hear, she really knows what she's talking about. So thank you for joining me, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of the Things I Want My Daughters to Know podcast. Have a great day, everyone.